The nature of addiction. The nature of addiction is, of course, characterized by attachment. And it is an interesting thing that when we're attached to something or addicted to something, we're not really addicted to a thing, to a particular thing. We're rather addicted to the feeling, to the emotional experience that we associate with that thing. So, for example, when our senses, when our mind uh, come in contact with a particular situation or a particular thing, that produces a particular emotional experience. And it is that emotional experience what we become attached to. So, therefore, to get rid of um, certain addictions or certain attachments that, first of all, the soul is always addicted or attached to something or someone. So if we want to shed, if we want to get rid of certain attachments, certain addictions that we don't consider desirable, then the program should be that we learn to attach or associate a different kind of emotional experience with that same situation or that same object. For example, one of the ways they treat nicotine addiction is by administering light electrical shocks. In other words, whenever a person behaves or thinks or makes a motion that indicates a desire to smoke a cigarette, they administer electric shock. So then eventually minds disassociates the pleasurable emotional experience with the smoking and associates the new one, the painful one, and therefore the mind gives up that addiction. Of course, in the case of practice of celibacy or Krishna consciousness, spiritual life in general, we don't have to resort to that kind of extreme measures, but we should certainly educate ourselves, because it is education that will change our emotional experience when we come in contact with a certain object or certain situation. Um, like for example, I'm in a male body, so most males are attracted to female bodies, and so when you come in contact with a female body, what do when you see a female body, what is it that you see? um, what is the emotional experience that you're undergoing when you come in contact with that body? That will depend on what is your understanding, what is your knowledge, what is it that you consider the female body to be. If you think it to be an object for your sensual exploitation, then sure, that is going to be emotional experience. So um, I remember my days before Krishna consciousness. I was just another crazed teenager, and I enjoyed particular activities, and I did enjoy female association, sensual association with females, and but once I came across Srila Prabhupada's books, and Srila Prabhupada changed my perspective on sense gratification. And therefore, I started to think of it in different terms. And therefore, it will produce my association with females, or my association with sense gratification, change the emotional experience. For example, Srila Prabhupada often describes four things. Of course, Prabhupada quotes the Vedas. Four things: eating, sleeping, mating, and defending, as basic animalistic urges. And when you start thinking of, in this case particularly, sex, if you start thinking of it as an animalistic thing, then even one day when you're in the middle of that act, I mean, you'll just look at yourself and you'll think, my God, I behave like an animal. This is gross. And therefore, the emotional experience will change. Therefore, to go back to recap it, to outgrow or to renounce uh, a particular attachment or addiction, education is needed. So, those of you who are trying to be celibate out there, or you have to take that education. You have to hang out with people who are discussing these kind of topics and who have a different view of sex. Uh, who don't see sex as as just a you know as a pleasure, but rather see it as a bestial activity and and an act of procreation. So if you hang out with this kind of people, discuss these topics with those people, read that kind of literature, then eventually the emotional experience that you're going to have when coming in a sexually charged atmosphere or a situation, your emotional experience of it will be different, and therefore you'll naturally outgrow it, you'll naturally reject it. And this is certainly so about any other addiction, whatever it might be. Shopping. Some people are attached to shopping. It's not that they're attached to the object, but they're attached. Just the act of shopping makes them have a particular emotional experience, which they then become attached to. So shopping, sex, drugs, alcohol, I mean, you name it. Any addiction or attachment works on this principle. We're never really attached to the act. We're attached to the emotional experience that we associate with that act. So when we associate a different type of emotional experience with that act, then we're going to outgrow it and renounce it. Hare Krishna.